You're listening to the Platte River Bard.
Hello, and welcome to the Platte River Bard. This is Chris Berger.
And I'm Sherry Berger.
And we are here today with Murphy Wulfgar, the Executive Director of Brigit St. Brigit. Thank you very much for talking with us this afternoon.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure to meet you. And I'm so excited for this upcoming production. And there were so many questions that I had, not just about the production, but about the theater group. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast and being willing to do it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be able to talk about it.
So you are the founder of Brigit St. Brigit.
Wow. I'm not the founder. Kathy Kurz is the founder.
Okay.
And then
Partial
I came
founder.
in second.
You came
But
in second.
I'm partial. I'm a co-founder.
You are a
Good.
co-founder.
There was only one production in our 30-year history that I wasn't a part of, and it was the first one.
Oh,
and then
wow.
From then on out, I've been a pillar of the theater.
I
with
totally think that counts as a co-founder.
Wow.
Yes.
30
Yes.
years. 30 years.
Yeah,
So-
it should be our 30th were it not for the pandemic.
But yeah, looking back, because I crossed a 30-year mark doing some stuff myself. And what was it like for you when you realized, 30? The whole time?
Yeah, I'll tell you, that wasn't the big wake-up call for me.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't. Like, the amount of time that I've been doing it now, it doesn't really make me blink. But the point, I think I repeated a play. I had done a play earlier, and I was just an actor in it, and it was a lot of fun, and we were goofing around all the time backstage. And then I don't know, it was like halfway into the theater tenure somewhere, we did that play again. It wasn't that Brigit St. Brigit had done it before. I had done it someplace else.
Okay.
And then we did it at Brigit St. Brigit. And this time I was involved in it, not just as an actor, but as the director, as the person running the theater, as the person paying the bills.
Okay.
And it was a whole different experience. It was
It
like, wow, I'm not the one sitting around laughing and goofing around in the lobby anymore while I'm the one running around trying to fix all the tech problems and do all the other things. And I've really grown up a lot, and my experience with my art form has completely changed. My relationship to it has completely changed.
Yeah.
And so that for me was the big one. And 30 years in, I feel more secure than I did early on. And I certainly trust myself more than I did. But yeah, that was the big one for me, was realizing, I'm the guy. I'm not the fun guy anymore.
Yeah, I can't just show up and
yeah. It was
okay. You can still be
was
fun
an
and be
adjustment.
responsible. It's okay.
Yeah,
I'm just glad
it can be challenging.
Yeah. I'm just glad it didn't, change your perception of wanting to be involved in the arts. So, sometimes that can be kind of a nail in the coffin.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, and I had that moment with myself. There was that, okay, this has become work. This isn't just fun for me anymore.
Sure.
And is it still something I need to do? Is it still something I want to do? And apparently the answer was yes.
Yes.
So
thankfully.
So it really, you're able to lean into it and then do it in a different way and engage with it in a different way.
Yeah.
But not be sort of resentful or bitter or sort of losing your joy for it.
Yeah.
But looking at different benchmarks, different things about it bring you happiness and bring you joy and fulfillment.
Yes.
And so, I definitely had that conversation with myself, though.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There comes a point, where the fun thing is now, this is a lot of work. So do I like this? And how do I like this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you find, and different ways in that you didn't even know were there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very
Yeah.
interesting.
And there was a point at which I started to sort of step away, where I started to, I wanted to do, I've always been really interested in film. And so I've done some stuff locally, personally.
Cool.
But then I was like, I want to see if I could do this professionally, like on a larger scale. So I got an agent in, Kansas City and St. Louis and Chicago. And then I started working regionally and within, I don't know, it was like 9 months or something, I found myself on Chicago Fire, like doing a part, a good, nice little guest starring part. And,
Cool.
Wow.
and then my dad got dementia. His dementia got worse. He had dementia, and
Okay.
it started getting worse. So I came back, but I never left the theater. I was always kind of doing things behind the scenes and still helping the theater run. But I took kind of a step back from acting and directing.
Okay.
And then once I came back and started doing things, and my life changed, and then to find myself in a different place at a different time, then engaging with theater again and doing it here and doing it in the way, not in the way that I was doing it before, but doing it differently, being a different person for all intent and purposes.
For sure.
That was really cool. That adjustment and that sort of awakening and coming back to the work differently and focusing it in a different way for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so, gosh, how long have you been back then since? It's
I think it's been since 2014.
wow.
Okay.
Okay, so not that long ago.
And then and the first show that I did back, like that I actually performed in and was that directed, was in 2018. So there was a period of time where I was back and I just wasn't acting or doing any of that.
Okay.
And then I did, and that's kind of what kicked off, like, this play, God on Trial, that I'm doing now,
Yes.
is the second in a series of plays that I'm doing.
Oh.
And so the first one that I had done in 2018 or 2019, it might have been 2019.
2019?
I think it was 2019.
Okay.
Was Arthur Miller's Incident at Vichy.
Oh,
Which
yeah.
is another story about the Holocaust, and it's about sort of prefacing a group of people being taken to a concentration camp.
Okay.
So they're in Nazi-occupied France, and the play is that these men are all rounded up, and the play opens, and there's like 13 men sitting there, and then one by one, they're brought into this offstage office and questioned as to whether or not they're Jewish. And their papers are checked, and some of the men come out and get to leave, and some of them you never see again. The idea is that they're being taken out the back door or being put in a jail cell, and then all being shoved on a train at some point and taken to a concentration camp. And so that was the first one that I had done back as sort of a performing artist and directing. But it also sort of started this whole new idea for me on how I'm looking at theater and doing sort of more immersive kind of found space theater that speaks to a really specific kind of idea or emotion that I feel like humanity is kind of going through at the moment, and finding it completely relevant. Finding, the lessons of the Holocaust should never stop being taught, and there are things about them that are so universal to all of us. Like, when something on that magnitude happens in the world, our DNA is forever altered as human beings.
Yeah.
And so, being Jewish myself and looking at it from that perspective, like at the time when I decided to do Incident at Vichy, the reason I decided to do it is because I picked it up. We were looking for plays to do, and I was thinking about directing again and coming back. And I picked up that script, and one of the first lines in the play was a character saying, "I knew I shouldn't have gone out today. I knew I should have stayed in. The minute I went out the door, they got me." And it was at the same time that all those ICE raids were going on all over the country and down at the border, and the kids in the cages and all that stuff. And so I kept reading, and I was like, oh my God, this is so relevant. Like, this was written in 1968 about something that happened in 1944, and it's absolutely relevant in 2019. Like, wow, we really just don't learn, do we?
No.
And so it really jazzed me up to tell that story. And then I was shown this film as sort of prepping for doing that other play.
Oh, okay.
And so when I saw the film of God on Trial, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to do that. And it opened up this whole idea for me about this whole, like the idea of Incident at Vichy is there's these 13 men in it, and there's one Nazi guard at the door. And yet one by one, they go in and they're taken away, and the group cannot gel. They just can't get together and get out of there.
Right.
They've been pushed into such a place of this psychological subjugation that they either don't feel they'll be able to overcome the guard, or they think that because they have a personal relationship with somebody that they're going to be able to skate by, or their little protected place in the world is going to be okay. So even though that guy's going to get taken, I'm probably going to be okay. So I don't want to risk it by getting through. So there's all kinds of motivations and reasons not to do something. But it's sort of this examination of how people deal with each other when their backs are up against a wall. And so God on Trial now is they're in Auschwitz. They have been imprisoned from wherever they came from whatever ghetto they came from, to the train that took them from that Jewish ghetto to the concentration camp, whatever horrors they endured along the way. Yeah. Here they are now in this hell on earth in this prison camp. And what this play brings forward is this sort of reckoning with God. Like there are devout Jewish members of the bunkhouse, and there are some who are atheists, and there are some who are, there's being a religious Jew, and then there's being a cultural Jew. Like my father was Jewish and my mother was Catholic. So I wasn't raised with any religion in our house because the two families did not get along with one another.
Okay.
So we'd go over to one side of the family for Passover and Rosh Hashanah and Hanukkah, and we'd go over to the other side of the family for Thanksgiving and Easter and Christmas. And for us kids, all it ever was an opportunity to get food or presents.
Exactly. Best of both worlds.
Yeah. And there was never anything more to that. And so my parents, in their infinite wisdom as young parents, made the decision to not introduce us to religion until we were old enough to understand what religion was. And so we were brought to it much later when we grew up, and we're older. But my foundation with it, growing up, I didn't grow up in Nebraska either. I grew up in New Jersey.
Okay.
And so I was around a lot of Jewish people, and I was around a lot of different kinds. Like I grew up in a really diverse place.
Cool.
And because the cost of living is so much higher on the East Coast than it is in Nebraska, when my dad, he was working for a company and they got bought out by Peter Kiewit and moved out here to Nebraska. Yeah. None of us knew where it was. Oh. We thought we were going to come out here and there were going to be like kids riding their horses to school. And like, in my mind,
not quite, but almost.
And I was 15. Like, and when you live in New Jersey, like there's New Jersey and then there's Florida. And then there's not much in between. So there's also New York. Like my dad was a Brooklyn boy, so we had relatives in New York. But there's like the tri-state area, and then Florida, and then the rest of the country is just kind of over there.
Yeah,
that's hilarious.
So when we came out here, it was a real culture shock, and because the little house in the little neighborhood that we were living in was so expensive because of living, we could have our pick of houses out here. And so my mom wanted to get as far out of the city as she could without being out in the boonies, as she called it.
Right.
And so we ended up in Elkhorn.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Elkhorn
and like zero Jews, zero, people of colors, zero, like any kind of diversity. It was a real culture shock for us.
I bet. Yeah.
And so that whole experience informed me, I think, in a way that when we started like taking it back to this play, like I was explaining to my cast like the difference between being a religious Jew and being a cultural Jew, like that you share a sort of tradition and a cultural thing, even if you're not observant and religious. And then you're on the religious side and there's a whole different thing. So in this bunkhouse, in the play that we're doing, you have a lot of different kinds of Jewish people and some people who that aren't even Jewish. People who were in the concentration camps, who were prisoners from other places, who were,
gypsies or something.
Whatever they were. It was they didn't necessarily have to be Jewish, although they were primarily Jewish.
Right.
Now this is sort of and this whole thing, the God on Trial is is supposedly a real incident that happened, but I guess for many years it was almost like folklore, like no one actually
Yeah.
knew if something like this happened, but it was rumored to,
Yeah.
and explain that, because it's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. It existed as it started out as a whisper of a story of this profound idea that these prisoners
Yeah.
tried to hold God accountable for breaking his covenant with the Jewish people.
Yes.
And so there were different accounts of it, and in his novel Night, Elie Wiesel talks a little bit about having these conversations with a rabbi in the camp when he was prisoner there, and about this idea of this great Jewish tradition of wrestling with God,
Right.
of arguing with God.
Yes.
And so later down the road, Elie Wiesel said that something like this actually did happen. And then he kind of gave two sort of accounts of what it would have looked like. There was one that maybe that there were three people who sat and had a conversation. Another one where he spoke about having conversations with a Rebbe that were about this person's idea of, we should do something like this. And then as life in the camp happened, you never saw that person again. They just suddenly disappeared. There were all these blockhouses, and each blockhouse housed 1,000 men, and they were all packed into these bunks, and so that mythology took on a life of its own, and people argued, did this really happen? Did this not really happen?
Yeah.
And in speaking to the production company in England who produced and developed this piece, they were very mindful of saying, this is fiction. Like, what we have created here is fiction.
Okay.
It's based on an idea that has been speculated could possibly be true. And it's based on an idea that we all kind of can hope and embrace is true in whatever way it actually is true, that we can't ever know, that we'll never, none of us were there. None of us can know what it was like and what those conversations were that sparked this whole mythology that was created around it. But they felt that this story was so important to tell. And it was such a powerful way of articulating not just something about specifically the Holocaust of the Jews, but about things happening all over the world, about all kinds of different Holocausts being perpetrated upon people, genocide being perpetrated across the globe, and how people reconcile with their faith in those times.
Yeah.
And how and within wrestling with your faith, you're reconciling with others who have a different faith or have a different level of that faith.
Yeah.
And so in this version, in the dramatization that Frank Cottrell Boyce, the writer, created, the whole bunkhouse participates.
Okay.
Like, everyone there's the three members of the rabbinical court, and there's the head of the court, the father of the court, and the dayan who asks the questions. And then everyone calls different witnesses, and some people just have had enough and they just want to throw their opinion in. And it's just this beautiful, passionate conversation between these people. And it happens on the heels of a selection, which was when new prisoners were brought into the camp. The current prisoners would go through a selection where they would be stripped down naked, and they would go through a line, and a German doctor would tell them to go left or go right. And they didn't necessarily know if going left meant you were going to be executed and going right means you were going to live a little while longer. So the play begins with that selection and these newcomers coming into this space. And then the dramatization of the play unfolds as tensions start to rise and tempers start to flare and people start to wrestle with their own immediate extinction and how that sort of bleeds over into their relationships with one another. And then somebody makes this offhand comment, we should put the he says we should put the bastard on trial. And there's a decision amongst some of the people in the room that, yeah, that's actually not a terrible idea. And one character thinks it's blasphemy, and another character who's a rabbi says, actually, it's not. You know, there's a great tradition, in a great Jewish tradition of arguing with God, of wrestling with God. And, and then as you go through the play, you hear these, you know, you hear all of these arguments.
Wow. That is intense.
Yeah.
And how many series are you wanting to do? So this is your second one. How many are you thinking you'll end up doing?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's kind of open-ended in my mind. I have an idea for 2 different plays. One is actually a play, and another is a story, a novel that I'm looking to turn into a play. And so the first one, Incident at Vichy, dealt with, you know, an individual's relationship to another individual in the course of undergoing this horror. This one is about, you know, sort of an individual's relationship with their faith, with a higher power, and wrestling with that higher power. And so as I think through further chapters sort of in this story, I think about what it would be like to wrestle with yourself after surviving it.
Yeah.
Or there's a play written by Tim Blake Nelson, which is one of the ones I'm considering, which is about the Sonderkommando. It's about these people who would push the other Jews into the crematorium, into the gas chambers, and then clean up afterward. And in the course of this, they find a person who hasn't died, and they don't know what to do. And should they risk themselves being exterminated and hide that person? And so there's a whole lot of themes that can come out of it. God on Trial seems like Incident at Vichy seemed really relevant when I did it because of what was going on, what's still going on, you know, to a certain extent with the border crisis and with the way immigrants are viewed in this country, and that entire narrative that continues to be debated, you know, in our halls of government, if you can still call them that. And then in this one, it's about people being able to like have conversations about really tough issues. I mean, think about that in the public square today, being able to argue your faith against another person's faith. Like that would end in violence within 5 minutes.
Every time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. It's something that I've been hearing from a lot of people that we need to get back to being able to. Can we just talk?
Well,
Can we just talk about it?
Is it just that people aren't able to articulate anymore? Because
I don't know what it is.
Because it used to be intelligent debates. I think at some point
something's happened.
At some point we lost that.
And passions are just running too high.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that this play is saying specifically, in my opinion, is that it isn't just one thing. That it's a whole host of things. More than half of which are absolutely valid. It's like, yes, your point is absolutely valid. It is absolutely. But there is a way in which that valid argument can then become part of the weaponized din of anger and of blame that then takes the productive part out of it, the part of it that helps us move forward as a society.
We lost that.
Yeah, and there's this idea in there's a Jewish idea called tikkun olam, which means to repair the world, and we've really talked a lot about it with the cast as we've been building the play, because one of the things I hope the audience really gets into with this is that this is it's just an exchange of ideas. It's so, I mean, these people are locked in this place. And that's why when I saw the film, I was like, I could totally do this as a play. This doesn't jump around all the time to this location and that location. We're in that blockhouse and we're dealing with these arguments. And the steam of this play is based on the the passion with which these arguments are argued and the way in which people respond to them and to each other, and the relationships that exist within those characters that make those arguments then have a cutting meaning or an empowering meaning.
Sure.
And I hope the way that we've staged this, the audience is in there with us, where the audience is sitting within the blockhouse with us. So their vantage point is from our vantage point.
Okay.
They're hearing the arguments as we're hearing the arguments.
So it's almost like they're sort of in there with you. You guys are doing this at the First Central Congregational Church.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. We were actually scheduled to do this we were 2 weeks away from opening when the pandemic hit.
Oh, man.
So we had rehearsed this in a very different space, in a very intimate, small location at UNO. There's like a director's lab at UNO that's in the space right by the theater, and it's really small. And they were gracious enough to let us be in there. And so we were going to have the audience literally right in there with us, and we were going to be packed in there really tight.
Oh, wow.
And we were the first theater, I think, that pulled the plug. Like we were, and I'm hyper vigilant about all of that. And I had been following the news for a really long time. And we had been, we were already masking up in rehearsals, and I was bringing wipes, and everybody was wiping everything down. And then it just, we all know the history. It just got so bad, everything just buckled, and we had to shut it all down. So when we came back to it after 2 years, really, I was looking at the play a very different way, but I said, okay, how can we now do this and make people feel safe? I still want this immersive experience to happen, but I can't put the audience on top of our laps. I can't. Yeah. Nobody's going to want that. No, the actor's not going to want that. Even though we do check vaccination cards and we do require masking, still,
we're not
there's going to be there's still going to be a part of your brain as an audience member that's not going to be with us.
Yeah.
And we really wanted to make sure that was the case. So we chose to do it at this location at First Central Congregation that's really big and really massive. So instead of creating the bunkhouse in a tight space, we created it in the whole room. We used the whole room, and instead of a row of bunks, you have like a bunk here, and then you have some audience chairs, and then you have another section of a bunk.
Oh, cool.
So the idea is that the bunks continue, and we're acting as though we're in that world, in that space. Yeah. But everywhere there would have been more prisoners now is audience. And people are able to be distant, but still be immersed in the event that's happening.
Wow.
And yeah, it's really cool. And it took us a while. It took us probably 2 or 3 weeks of rehearsal to really land on the configuration that we felt could work for us and could work for the audience. And it came from the actors, not just from me, from people saying, hey, what if we move this over here? And what if we put these 2 chairs over here? And after all of that, we found ourselves in this space that we really feel like when you walk in there and there's nothing in that room feels huge. And when you walk in there now, you feel like you're just in a community.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that, I think, is really a huge part of being able to translate this from the screen, especially where they can do it. Yeah, especially this.
Yeah.
And to do it in person and make that leap to the stage without losing anything.
Well, and I really like that. And I know a lot of some theaters have been kind of trending towards this, is that this whole immersive sort of theater experience. And it sounds like that's kind of been your personal direction on doing theater for a while now.
Yeah. Yeah. When I started directing again and started acting a little bit again, that was the thing that lit my fire. Yeah. It was like I had done, over 100 plays with Brigit St. Brigit, and I had done, lots of great roles, and I was really privileged to be able to do those things. But as I started coming back to it, I was like, okay, this is, the theater is our unique artistic expression. So if I'm going to get out of bed and do something, and it's going to be my voice and my time and all of it, it needs to be something I want to say. It needs to be something I have to say. And so adding that layer to it of saying, okay, I don't want to build the artifice on top of the play, which is totally valid. And I'm not shoo-shooing that as a thing. Like, people do beautiful work and there's beautiful set designs.
Oh, yeah.
But for me, having the audience being able to do it and have it come off really successfully, like we did Incident at Vichy, and have the audience come up to me afterward and go, that was so powerful. Yeah. There were people who came back like more than once to see the show just to sit in a different space so they could be next to another actor.
Oh, wow.
So that they could see what that person was going through the duration of the whole play. Wow. And I'd never even thought that would be like a thing. Like I wanted them to be close and I wanted it to be immediate, but I hadn't thought about it as in terms of being personal. Like to an actor who doesn't speak for a whole bunch of, the play.
Right.
And to still want to sit there and feel what they're feeling and experience what they're experiencing as the story unfolds. Yeah. And so that immersive idea really lit something off in me that was like, I really want to figure out how to do more of this where instead of pushing the play out to the audience, I'm making the audience lean into me,
bringing the audience into it,
and want them to lean forward. And I want to say something quiet enough that you kind of have to creep forward in your seat a little bit to make sure you're hearing it and engaging them in that intimate way. Without it being intrusive. Like people go to the theater and they don't want to be messed with.
Right.
They want to be.
Yeah, it's not the Renaissance Festival.
It's a delicate
leave the audience alone.
Right, exactly. So we never cross that line ever.
Yeah. It's
just like you're a fly on the wall. You're there, but you feel like, oh wow, how did I end up here? Mm-hmm. And if we're doing our job at certain points during the play, they'll forget they're watching a play. And they'll feel like they're just watching people have an argument, and that thing really excites me when it works.
Yes.
And so it really has become the focus of everything I do now. When I look at a play, I look at it from that exact perspective.
Well, and it changes the experience from an audience member's point of view for sure. And I can't, not having done anything sort of specifically like this, it's got to really affect the actors and their performance. And I mean, in really quite a significant way, I would imagine.
Yeah, it does. And that's another thing. Almost all the time, not exclusively, but most of the time when I direct, I'm also acting as well.
Okay.
And I'm acting in this show as well. And that's just kind of how I learned how to do it.
Right.
I learned by participating. I learned by being in that environment, and collaboration is wonderful and it can work, but it needs some structure. It needs some guidance. And I have found that being a part of it, the actors are more willing to talk to me with their ideas. They're more willing to share with me when I'm in a scene. Yeah. And I feel like I want to try getting this actor to come play with me a little more. Mm-hmm. I can actively just do it. And I can bring that performance out. So once the play is going and we're in with the audience, I'm experiencing it as an actor as well. And just from talking to the people who I've worked with who've been a part of that, they feel the same thing. There's like this relationship they feel like they build with the audience, as opposed to them being just sort of dimmed out past the lights,
right?
On the stage.
What a different kind of energy that would really feed them, feed in just a different way. Yeah.
And when you're right out there and you're giving a line and you're like, and it's something with weight, it's a really poignant moment in the play, and you take that breath and you could hear a pin drop.
Yes.
And you see the person sitting 2 feet away from you is just totally in it.
Yes.
It feeds you. It totally feeds you as a performer.
Yeah. Normally as a performer, we don't get to see their faces when stuff like that happens. We can hear the silence. You can hear when you get to those pin drop moments and it's like, okay, I'm doing well. But you don't get to see their faces. I can't imagine what that's like. What an energy that must create.
Yeah, it's really cool. Keeping the audience safe and comfortable.
Yeah. And
yet letting them feel like they're in the immediacy of what's happening in front of them.
Right.
Is is really it's a really fun dance to figure out.
Yeah.
But when it does work, and it doesn't always work, but when it does, you can really feel the difference, and that's exciting.
Wow. And it seems like, I mean, obviously this subject has a personal meaning for you. Do you feel that it's also kind of, because your mom was Catholic and your dad was Jewish, do you feel like you're a little bit more connected to your dad and learning from your father's family's experiences? And
yeah, it was interesting when I came back from, pursuing a different sort of acting career life. And I never liked the nomadic actor thing. I like being home.
yeah.
I like being here. I don't like being in hotels. I don't like going from cast to cast to cast. I like working with a lot of the same people again and again and again, building a repertory company and then bringing new people into that company all the time. And that for me is fun and interesting. So just personally, that was something. But once my dad, his dementia got so bad, and I was really good with him at the time. Like I've always been so busy and really like the black sheep of my family. So I haven't always been the dutiful son, and I'm not around all the time. I don't go to the birthday parties. I don't, I'm not that person. I've always been so busy doing 12 different things. And my ADHD, I really am neurodivergent, and that is really present, not just in my work, but in my life. And I'm a really big advocate for it now. So the pandemic really brought it home for me. Like I had forgotten that I had ADHD. Totally forgot. I was diagnosed as a kid, and I was taking Ritalin and I forgot about it. I just didn't remember because I wasn't on it, and you just learn to adapt and move on.
You learn to deal with it.
Yeah. And my partner was diagnosed autistic. And so then she started researching autism and started researching ADHD. And she said, you're ADHD, remember? And I was like, what are you talking about? And she's like, yeah, you're ADHD. Your mom told me blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, that's right. And all these bells went off in my head.
Yeah.
Like all these things about how I do, what I do, and why I do it all really started to make sense to me. So when I came back to really try to be present for my dad, I couldn't run off to Chicago to do an audition anymore. Before I'd hop in the car, I'd drive 8 hours, I'd audition, and I'd come back. But I couldn't really do that anymore. I had to be more reliable for him and for everything. So I got a job at the Jewish Community Center. And I hadn't really been connected to my Jewish heritage prior to that, since we left New Jersey. And since I wasn't seeing my relatives on the regular, it was there, but it wasn't always like a big thing. But once I got back into that environment, I started working with other people in that community, and I started remembering all of this stuff from my upbringing and helping my dad with his dementia, connecting with him on that level.
Yeah.
Because the adult stuff, the stuff of him being my dad, wasn't really present for him. But the stuff about him being a young guy and his bar mitzvah and going up to the bungalow in New York and, him and Bobby Mandel cutting the top off of an old Chevy with a chainsaw so they had a convertible. Like these are the stories he would tell over and over again.
Awesome.
And it would really put us in this place of, talking about his upbringing in a way that he had never shared with me before.
Yeah.
And at the same time, here I am working at the Jewish Community Center, and I was working specifically for the Anti-Defamation League.
Okay.
So being on guard for anti-Semitism and extremism and stuff. And I got my job in 2016, right before Trump became president. Oh. And then the world just changed.
Yep.
Like it just changed. From when I first started working at the ADL, I was getting maybe a couple of incident reports, in the course of a month, maybe. And then within a year, and Charlottesville happened, and, if I wasn't getting 2 or 3 calls every day, it was unusual.
Wow.
And so things just quickly went off the rails, and that took me even further into my experience, because I experienced anti-Semitism as a kid. We got pulled out of a Catholic school we were going to a public school, and then it was a really not a good, safe place to be. And we almost got hurt. Some of us, there were 5 of us kids, and we're all pretty close together in age. And there were no cross guards, and there was like a busy area, and we almost got hit by a car. And so my mom freaked out, and she was like, they're going to a private school. We're getting them out of the public school system. And so we ended up going to Sacred Heart, this Catholic school. And so here I am with, being brought up with no religion, because my parents wanted to stay as far away from it as they could.
That's some culture shock for you.
Yeah. So it's like, wow. So, and because I was sort of the performer in the family, like I sang in the choir. So I'd sing in the choir, and then I'd go sit at the back of the church while communion happened. And then I'd come back up and I'd sing. So here I was like being a part of their praise and their celebration, and then punching out the clock and going to the back of the house. and it just didn't occur to me that was strange. Like that was just the way it was.
That's the way it was. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was, I was in 6th grade, so I wasn't wearing anything on my sleeve. So I guess kids started wondering why I wasn't taking communion or whatever. And then it's like, oh, he's Jewish. They're Jewish. And all these friends that I had made, like within the first year of being there, just turned on me like a dime.
Oh no.
And they, looking back, they're kids, and kids are just mean sometimes, and they do.
They learn it somewhere.
And they were learning it from somewhere. So we were starting to get called like dirty Jews and commie Jews, and me, I had no frame of reference for. I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I
didn't
even know.
What do you mean? I'm not Jewish. I don't go to temple. We're not religious at all. And I didn't understand that, being Jewish didn't mean religion. It meant something else.
Yes.
I wasn't connecting it to a race or a people. I was connecting it to religion still at that point. And even into adulthood, I kind of still did that. But then I started fighting all the time, and, having to defend myself. And so all of that really informed what I think was a very unique perspective for me to be looking at the world from, and not just to be experiencing the world, but to be reconnecting with my Jewish heritage from. So here I am in this place, in this time, wanting to be more mindful of social justice issues, and wanting to do work that matters, and stuff that's important. And, feeling this connection to my Jewish self that I hadn't really thought about before. And so it started just merging with my art, and started coming out in the plays I was choosing to do, and the way that I was choosing to do it. So that really did lead me into this road. But it, when I, listen to myself just telling that story, like all the pieces that had to fall into place for all those things to sort of mesh up to put me in this space that I'm in now, including my neurodivergence, like all of that really informs not just who I am as an artist and what I'm doing, but I think what I'm giving to my actors. Like when when we rehearse in a really immersive kind of way too. Like I do welcome conversation in the rehearsal process, and I don't block. Like I don't block a play up front. Like the first time we do something at a rehearsal, we just sit and we read it.
Okay.
And the whole first week of rehearsal was just for us. It was just table work. We have a dramaturg on the production, and we have a cantor, a Jewish cantor who's helping us with stuff. So it was all learning about the Holocaust, learning about Judaism, learning about the difference between being a religious Jew and a cultural Jew, and me sharing my personal experiences with them, and then having them share some of their personal experiences with me. And being able to then say, okay, now let's take all of that information and synthesize it into these arguments. So we'd start the rehearsals, and we'd just sit there and we'd read and say, okay, this, when you're saying this, do you feel like, I feel like this could be like this, or this could be like that. And like, it really seems like it makes sense if you were talking to this person when you were saying that. So maybe you would move over here, and then we'd start to slowly get up on our feet. And it was a really organic process. And I've been working like that more and more, but I was really much more playful about it this time in terms of not being worried about it. Like the first time I ever directed, and Kathy, who's the artistic director of the theater, is the best director I've ever worked with, hands down. And I learned a lot, most everything that I know structurally how to be a director from Kathy.
Okay.
And but then when I was given the opportunity to direct for the theater, I was like, I don't know if I know how to do this. And when I came to rehearsal, I was like, I don't have any ideas. So like, I don't come to rehearsal with a bunch of preconceived notions loaded up in my head, which is the way other people work. And, and I see it work, and it works really well. But I couldn't do it. So I thought maybe I'm not cut out for this. And the more I did it, the more I started trusting, oh, that's just not me. That's not how my brain works.
For sure.
That's not how my ADHD brain works. I can't look at a text, even as an actor, I can't look at a text and learn my lines. I can't just sit there and bang lines into my head.
Yeah.
If I get up on my feet and I start saying the lines in rehearsal, they're there. I have them. But if I have that intention behind them and all that stuff, it's great. And the same thing with direction. So for me to imagine how this other person is going to do this line, I couldn't possibly do it. But hearing them do it and seeing their impulses, then I could help shape and bring things out and move things around. And so I've learned to trust that. I've learned to be calm when I start and go, okay, I don't know what this is going to be. I don't know how we're going to get there, but I know we're going to get there because it's happened every time. And so that thing I was talking about earlier about being into this for 30 years, that's where I think that trust thing for me, that centeredness helps me approach a work from is I can read it and I can respond to it, and then I can have no idea how I'm going to do it.
Sure.
And then I build it section by section, 4 pages, 5 pages at a time. And then we run the chunk together and say, oh, this works. Or, oh boy, this one thing in the middle, I just really was off the mark on that. And so it really is an organic process between me and the people who are in the room at the time.
And if you're thinking about adapting your next play from a book, that's kind of the next step into writing your own and directing your own, really.
Yeah, and I actually did in 2003, I did an adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Okay.
Oh, cool.
Which I don't know if you've ever read the novel.
Yes.
But it's nothing like any of the movies that have ever been made.
No, Francis Ford Coppola got the closest, I think, but it was still Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula.
Yeah. And it was still, way off in the weeds somewhere with some of that stuff.
Yes.
And so I really wanted to bring the novel as it's written to the stage. Which
I adore.
And me too. And I did. And it was really a fun process. Like if you look at that novel, it's written as journal entries.
Yes.
So Harker's journal you're reading Lucy and Mina's journals, you're reading excerpts from a newspaper, and the narrative is pieced together through all of these. It's a really masterful way of writing something.
Yeah, it is.
And if you take it apart and if you take all the pages out and you put it on a timeline, so you see when Harker is doing this journal, Lucy's writing this journal on this date at this time.
Okay.
And everything starts to sync up. And so when Dracula is progressing in his conversations with Harker, he's learning how to be an Englishman.
Yes.
He's learning his mannerisms. He's learning. So being able to theatrically show that and then get to the point where he leaves Harker there to die, and he gets on the Demeter, this boat that takes him to Whitby, where he encounters Mina and Lucy. And Lucy's sleepwalking starts on, if you look at it, it just blew my mind when I did this. I know I'm totally off
I love this
here, but
I love this.
But when if you read the novel and you look at the dates and you look at an atlas, when the ship, the Demeter, crosses this mountain range, it is the first time that he has clear line of sight. If you were a satellite, you'd have clear line of sight to England.
Okay.
You'd still never be able to see, but I think what Stoker was trying to do is that his telepathy or whatever the heck he's able to do he's able to connect with Lucy because the mountains were in the way the whole time.
Okay. And now he's got a clear shot.
Yes. And he's really trying to search for Mina because that's who Harker was engaged to.
Right.
But he finds this other person who's susceptible to sleepwalking already. So he builds in all this beautiful stuff. And I was like, why does nobody ever put this in a movie? This is beautiful. This is great.
Yes.
So I put it all into the play, and I ended up with a play that was 3.5 hours long.
Yes.
That's great.
It was too long. It was just people really enjoyed it, and they were really kind about it, and I think they liked a lot of it, but it was just a sit. It was a sit and a half. And we had 2 intermissions, and but I got my first taste of writing. And I was like, oh, I really like this. I really enjoy this. And I really enjoy adaptation.
Yeah.
So I adapted another thing after that we did. And then I've adapted several short stories. And then recently I've started writing my own stuff, which we did right before the pandemic. I did a play. It was like a series of vignettes called Holiday Lights. It's like a yearly thing we're going to do, and we had to cancel it this year because of COVID, because of the resurge, and couldn't find a safe enough space to do it in. But I wrote a play it's an encounter between a Jewish guy and Krampus, the goat demon Christmas guy.
Yes.
And it's the Jewish guy. The Jewish guy is coming home from a holiday Christmas party. And he encounters Krampus, who says, "You've lost the Christmas spirit, so I'm going to put you in my sack," and like the whole folklore. And the Jewish guy is like, "Wait a minute, I'm Jewish." He's like, "I don't have any Christmas spirit by definition." And so I wrote this thing, and the audience really loved it. And it was the first time I'd written some stuff for film that I'd done as a screenplay for myself, but it was the first time I'd written a theater piece, and I really enjoyed doing it, and it was a good time. So I've been building up my confidence to do more writing over the years. So looking ahead to doing something really excites me, because that's really kind of where I see myself shifting into is writing more. And it really intrigues me. That whole medium really intrigues me.
I can totally see that happening. I mean, if you're going to have other series, and this is definitely a subject that you're passionate about. And for, we kind of had on the podcast, we always want to keep the conversation of arts going, and we want it to be kind of a resource too for people to learn about theater who maybe are thinking about being in it, but they're not comfortable. So I guess I just have a newbie question to ask that we can talk about. When you adapt something, how do you handle the copyright of adapting something? Does it have to be a certain amount of years old before you can turn it into something else?
Yeah. If you want to just play fast and loose with it and write whatever you want to write and feel what you want to feel, it has to be in the public domain.
Okay.
That's what I thought.
And if it's copyrighted material like this was, like, I don't make any changes to this kind of work. Like there was a strict contract I had to sign and all of that stuff with the company in England. And it's different for different things. So this one, I wouldn't even say I adapted it for the stage. I just figured out how to present it as a theater piece.
Okay. Yeah, because this was originally a television series on the BBC. Okay. Yeah. So it was multiple nights, I guess.
No, they refer to the series being like Masterpiece Theater. Like that was the series.
Okay.
And it's just one film, and it's just an hour and 15 minutes long.
Okay.
And that's why I think not a lot of people know the title, because it wasn't a theatrical release or anything like that.
And it aired sort of under a different series name, and it was just one of the
people
things
who regularly watch Masterpiece Theater probably may have seen it in 2008 when it came out.
Okay.
And the only reason I knew it is because my partner is a religious studies and philosophy teacher, and uses it in their class to talk about religion. To talk in that context. And so that's why they shared it with me.
Cool.
And I immediately saw the theatrical value in it as well.
Oh,
yeah.
But yeah.
Wow. It sounds like a really powerful.
Yeah. Gotta get out and see this.
Yes, absolutely. Sounds like a really powerful film. And I bet you probably there's not very many left, but I bet you probably have some family members that want to come out, and you might hear from like your last production. Do you get any feedback from people who have maybe had that experience, or?
We actually when I was doing Incident Vichy, I was still working at the Jewish Community Center, which I'm not anymore. I'm just doing the theater now.
Yeah.
And we had an actual survivor in the audience
Yeah.
one night, and we would do talkbacks after each performance. And so we did a weekend of performances out at the Jewish Community Center. The rest of the run was in Benson at that B-side in that diner that I told you about.
Mm-hmm.
But we did one performance out there, and we had a really interesting conversation, and he held the conversation for a really good amount of time. And he spoke to me afterwards and told me how much he enjoyed the production and how happy he was that we were doing it and that we were being so meticulous about really being truthful about the experience. And
that's got to be really gratifying.
It is. And it's also a little intimidating. Like when I thought about doing this one, I was a little intimidated because it's in Auschwitz. So we're wearing those striped uniforms.
Yeah.
And, I shaved my head, and so the first time I did it, I was really focused on the Holocaust aspect of it and making sure I was getting everything right.
Mm-hmm. And
then after being able to sit with it for 2 years, I came at it from a very different perspective and thought that this is a Holocaust story that couldn't be told in another way, but it's not about the Holocaust. It's about God. It's about this people's relationship to their faith and each other in this place and in this time. So when I was talking to the actors, we made sure that everybody understands how, not just the stakes of what was going on in the Holocaust, but trying to be really mindful of any space that we inhabit where we're bearing the torch of remembering, where we're saying, okay, this must be remembered. Right. And so part of why we're doing this play is that we must remember.
Yes.
But beyond that, the people who were living through that at that time weren't thinking about the history of the Holocaust. They were just living. They were just trying to survive.
Yeah.
They were just having this argument with God without the benefit of knowing everything that was going on with Mengele and with Hitler so there are these references in the play where we were like, okay, we're referencing these people, but we don't completely know the whole story that we know now.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to put ourselves in that place of saying, okay, we're experiencing this as
in real time,
as an immediate real-time event.
Yeah.
And we're making these arguments. So it was really almost more important in some ways for them to understand Judaism and for them to understand Jewish culture and be able to pay homage to that and to celebrate that at the same time that we're because people shouldn't come out of it feeling like some of the most hopeful, energetic, and inspiring people I've ever met were Holocaust survivors.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how they did it. I don't know how but they just were patient, and they were willing to listen, and they were generous and hopeful about the future.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so saying, okay, we want to do this play, we want to tell this story, but we want the audience to come away feeling invigorated by the arguments, by remembering, the importance of remembering, and the importance to go on and take the lessons to, again, that idea that I talked about earlier, that tikkun olam, that repairing the world.
Yes.
That's why we do this. That's why we do theater to a certain extent.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
Art makes the world a better place. A world without art is a world devoid of empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And so any piece that we do, any piece that I really engage with, I first engage with on an empathetic level, and say, where's the value in this for our collective empathy, and then say, okay, now I need to make sure this is my thing to screw up. Like, I totally see the potential here. This has been written by a really smart person in a really beautiful way. Now I have to honor all of that.
Yes.
And include a whole group of people who are going to do the same.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, I'm really, really excited for people to see it. I feel like I'm really proud of this cast.
Excellent.
And yeah,
I can totally see why. Yeah, I can totally see why. And for so many people in the world that say, oh, the Holocaust didn't happen, or we're just getting to the point where we are losing all the survivors and the stories aren't there anymore. The stories have to continue to be told. And it's so wonderful that you're doing that, because
I'm old enough. I had the advantage when I was in grade school. We had a couple of Holocaust survivors come and talk to the kids, but I mean that was in the 70s, and so that was a long time ago. And there's like almost nobody left now.
Yeah.
You can't do that anymore.
When I worked at the ADL, we shared office space with the Institute for Holocaust Education. Yeah. And they are out there every day, all the time, bringing survivors, the few that are left here in Omaha, to the schools, and the children of those survivors and their children's children, and finding other innovative ways to keep Holocaust education alive and relevant. And we all know that there's, extremism is extremely prolific right now. Yeah. And not to mention what's going on in Ukraine and how many shadows of history we're seeing there at the same time, and the suffering. And so with all of these things going on, and we wrestle with this stuff at the theater all the time. It's like, people want to get out and they want to get away from that. They want to lose themselves in something else. And I think that you can do both at the same time.
I think so
that
too.
You can give them something that absolutely is relevant to what's going on now, but do it in such a way that they feel invigorated by it by the end, and not just more pummeled by the news. Like when they get home. Seeing that triumphant human spirit of these people in this play, making this argument, being weak and hungry and sick and tired, and still trying to cling to their faith, or still, even if they don't have faith in God, they're trying to cling to their faith in reason and logic and debate. And it's just a beautiful testament to what the human spirit can be, even in the most horrific circumstances.
The humanity of it is just what should appeal to everyone. And it's one of those stories that sort of is the point, is the humanity of the whole thing, and with us having this argument, wrestling with God.
And we're doing it on the last weekend of the run falls on Passover and Easter, both happening at the same time.
That's right.
And we're in Ramadan, I think, right now. And so there's this confluence of events happening, and we've already got reservations for Easter Sunday. Like, we're already half full, which I was really surprised about, and really gratified about, because I think it's a beautiful way for people who do observe those holidays and do so in a religious way. Even it's a beautiful way to remind yourself of that connection to your faith, that personal connection that you can have, and somebody else sitting next to you can have a very different personal connection, and that can be okay.
And that's okay.
And so we're not going to do a curtain call for this show.
Fair enough.
So at the end of the play, what happens is, it's really heavy. And by the end of the play, some of them are taken off to be exterminated. I mean, that's just what happened in reality. And so we want to leave the audience in a place where they can reflect and they can think. And there's a beautiful labyrinth at the church. There's this big patio, and you can walk the labyrinth.
I love labyrinth walks.
And we decided not to do talkbacks after the performances, but we're going to hold an online talkback, like a live talkback once the show closes, and invite anybody who came to see the play and anybody who wants to really to come share their thoughts about the production, to ask questions. We'll have some scholars with us. We'll have the cantor who was helping us with that stuff be there to answer questions. And we're just really hoping that there's a community of people that can connect over this work and really understand the value of it and the importance of remembering these stories.
I love that you're doing that. That is so neat. So you can get everybody on. Yeah.
Very smart how to handle all that. I think that's a brilliant idea.
It really is.
Thank you.
Wow, I can't wait to see it. And
yes,
it just sounds like there's just so much there that's just so good. I'm excited to see it. And thank you.
Good, yeah.
Thank you so much for being willing to talk to us about it.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
So glad to be able to talk with you and talk about Brigit St. Brigit. So
Yeah.
it's been a long time coming. So
Yeah, it has
thank you
been.
for being patient, and we'll get back to you for sure.
Right, well-
it won't be as long.
Yeah. Hopefully, if there's no
okay.
pandemic anyway.
Like I
Right?
said, if I was on social media more, which I should be to
I
promote
know.
the theater,
Yeah.
but I would have seen you sooner. But yeah, I really appreciate you
okay.
having me and for taking the time to have a
Oh.
lovely conversation about it.
Yes,
sir.
absolutely. And when this whole thing is over, we'll have to do coffee or something
Yes.
when things are kind of a
All
little bit
right.
easier.
Via Zoom.
Via Zoom, there
Coffee
you go.
via Zoom.
We can do that then. That sounds good. So the show runs April 1st through the 17th, and it looks like you've got, I was trying to count here,
It's like 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 7th, 8th,
9
9th,
shows? 9
Yep.
shows?
15, 16,
Yeah.
and 17.
Okay.
We do Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Okay.
Okay.
So only 10 opportunities.
That's right.
I
And
guess
Sundays
it
are
is.
matinee.
9.
That's the case. Oh, it is.
We're not
9.
doing that Sunday in between.
Oh, you're doing
It's
Thursday
just-
instead.
Yeah, and we're doing Thursday is $10 or pay what you can.
Okay.
So that performance is for anybody who can't afford regular ticket prices, which are $35 for general admission, $30 for student, senior, military.
Okay.
But we do have that opportunity on that Thursday for $10, or like I said, pay what you can to come see the play.
Oh,
Excellent.
awesome. Yeah. Oh, I can't wait. And to have that talk back afterwards, that's fantastic. So,
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see who shows up and what they have to say, what their feelings were about it.
Yeah,
I'm
they
looking
had a
forward
chance to think about it. Yeah, for sure.
And it's at the First Congregational Church.
421 South 36th Street. And it's on our website. If you go to get tickets, there's a little directions button and you
Yeah.
can click on that and it'll
Oh, it'll take you to it.
explain the parking and
Ah,
how to
yes.
get there.
Well, thank you so much, Murphy Wulfgar, the executive director of Brigit St. Brigit, for talking with us today about their upcoming play, God on Trial.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening and supporting the arts in the Platte River area and beyond. Please subscribe to our podcast so you are sure to catch all of our future episodes and join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Music for this podcast was used with permission by Screaming Skull Productions. See you next time on the Platte River Bard.